City Clerk, can I get a roll call?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Daniel Damian,
Here.
Councilmember Monica Garcia,
Here.
Councilmember Paul Hernandez,
Not, well, we can assume that Councilmember Hernandez is running late, and I will make a motion to excuse him. Can I get a second?
Second.
Any objections? City Clerk, continue.
thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Alejandra Avila,
Here.
Mayor Emanuel Estrada.
Here. Thank you for that. And at this moment, we will open up public communications. If there's anybody looking to speak, the time to do so is now. And it's because this is a special meeting, you can only comment on the issues on the agenda. Seeing that nobody is looking to speak, I will now move and close public communications. And I believe we have a open session with City Planner Ron Garcia regarding accessory dwelling unit ordinance update.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor, Council, staff, and the audience. As Mark's putting up the PowerPoint presentation, I just wanted to give you a brief summary of tonight's presentation. Is essentially to go over the modifications to the proposed ADU ordinance for the city in compliance with the state law. Essentially outlines allowing accessory dwelling units on all single-family residential properties, including junior accessory dwelling units only on single-family residential properties, and also multifamily, and also mixed-use zones. I will also go over the state-exempt accessory dwelling units that the city has to approve by right. And then there's also a ministerial ADU permit review that the city can review that is state non-exempt. So that's just a brief summary of what I'll be going through in the presentation. Next slide, please. Next slide. There we go. So again, the proposed code amendment is to address various state assembly and Senate bills passed in the last 2 years. And just as a refresher, in November of 2018, I just had come on board and the council adopted an ordinance amending the municipal code related to ADUs to address the state assembly bills that had been passed in 2016 and 2017. The ordinance, one key thing to remember in this slide, and I'll go over it in detail, is the ADU ordinance that was passed by the city in 2018 prohibited ADUs for lots that fronted substandard streets. Second is any ADU, any single-family residential lot located within 300 feet of a school bus stop. And then third, lots located on a street with permit parking. With the changes in state law, essentially took away local control. And so with that, with this amendment, staff and also the land use attorney met for 6 months with state HCD to go over which one of these categories can we still prohibit ADUs based on our current ordinance. And again, I'll go into detail that exercise that we went over with HCD. And again, ADUs, the law that was amended, essentially was to approve, the impetus for that was to improve its effectiveness at creating more housing units and further reduce barriers, also to better streamline approval processes and also expand capacity to accommodate the development of ADUs and junior accessory dwelling units, which are often referred to as JDUs. Next slide. So prohibiting ADUs in the state law essentially indicated that prohibiting ADUs may only be on the basis on adequacy of water, sewer service, and impacts on traffic flow and public safety. Any limitation should be accompanied by detailed findings of fact explaining why ADU limitations are required and consistent with these factors. HCD gave an example for prohibiting ADUs is public safety. For example, those lots that are within a severe fire hazard area and also inadequate water and sewer service. One example is like obviously Baldwin Park is not located up against San Gabriel Valley Mountains. A lot of those homes have septic tanks. So there are findings that you can make to prohibit those. So this exercise, as I mentioned, we went through with the state for about 6 months to see which one of those prohibitions that we had that we can continue. And one of them was the prohibition of ADUs on substandard streets. And unfortunately, the state did not concur with our thought process in that they had essentially responded by saying, well, we don't limit single-family residential development on substandard streets, and safety, fire services are still provided to those homes that are located on those substandard streets. So we said, okay, and then we looked at water and sewer service. And essentially, we're looking at water and sewer service if, at the council's direction, did want to move forward with that, and also traffic flow. That would require direction from the council to essentially request studies from a traffic consulting firm to really kind of look at what the traffic impacts are throughout the city as a whole, and also providing sewer and water services. There is no guarantee in discussions with HCD that they would honor. It's a 50-50 chance at the end of the day that the city would be risking in acquiring those studies to see if how we can limit the building of ADUs throughout the city. So again, it's up in the air. HCD's response was also HCD's response was reminding us essentially that ADUs, if you remember in the housing element discussions that we've been having these past couple months, is that ADUs, we can use ADUs to count towards meeting our RENA numbers. So we responded and we said, okay, no problem, but it's something that that the council could revisit, but it's imperative that we move forward with adopting an ordinance that's in compliance with state law. So at this moment, this ordinance that's going to be brought forward to the Planning Commission and the City Council is essentially allowing ADUs throughout the city without any prohibitions. And moving on, I'm going to go over the state exempt ADUs and also what requires an ADU application review through the Planning Division. So essentially, state law indicates that it prohibits a local agency from establishing a maximum size of an ADU of less than 850 square feet. And I'll go into detail with this in the following slides. Or 1,000 square feet if the ADU contains more than one bedroom, requires approval of a statewide exemption ADU of up to 800 square feet, 16 feet in height and 4 feet side and rear yard setback. So here, the state exemption, when we're looking at ADUs, we look at two things. One, does the ADU comply with the standards for a state exemption? And so what that means is the Planning Division cannot review the application per the Planning Division. It's exempt and moves straight to the building plan check process. And again, if it's 800 square feet, no more than 16 feet in height and 4 foot side and rear yard setback, that is state exempt. We cannot review it for ministerial review. It goes straight into plan check. So it's an 800 square foot, 16 feet in height and 4 feet. One other key thing to mention on the 800 square feet state exempt ADU is, for example, you have a scenario where you have a single family residential lot that's built out. It's exceeding lot coverage. We have to, state law says that we have to allow an 800 square foot ADU. No ifs, ands, or buts. We have to allow it. So that was one key change in the ADU law that we have to follow. If the ADU exceeds more than 800 square feet, that is where it exceeds that threshold for the Planning Division to process what we call an ADU permit review, which is ministerial. We review it to make sure it's in compliance with setbacks, height, and so on. So again, I just want to emphasize anything over the 800 square foot state exempt ADU allows the planning division to review that. Again, as I mentioned, it requires no lot coverage, floor area ratio, open space, or minimum lot size, and it precludes the construction of a statewide exemption ADU. I know this is it sounds confusing. I think when the legislature wrote this, I think they were purposely making this confusing, because if you ask any planner in the state of California, it was a very confusing, in my opinion, a poorly written ADU law. So bear with me if you are confused. And next slide.
Ron, if I can, real
Yes.
quick. In regards to the exempt through the state 800 and less square feet for the ADUs, does that still require them, of course, to have the minimum setback and all those type of standards as it relates to our city code?
Yes, good question. So on the 800 square feet ADU, the state law also made a change. So we could no longer enforce our minimum required setback requirements for those zones. So under a state exempt accessory dwelling unit, they reduced that setback to 4 feet. So we could no longer, that's one thing that we have to take into consideration when reviewing the ADUs, is making sure that they comply with that minimum state standard of 4 feet side yard and rear yard.
And what about height requirement?
16 feet, so
Also-
single story.
Single story. Okay, thank you.
So this slide here shows you a change. So the first chart is what's existing and what we approved back in 2018 at the time. So there was a threshold. There's a sliding scale of lot size between 5,000 or less, and then 5,000 to 8,000, and then 8,000 and over. Maximum allowed ADU for attached to an existing single-family dwelling. That calculation came out to be 50% of the living area of the existing dwelling up to 600 square feet. As I mentioned before, the state law made a change indicating that we could not set a lower threshold, anything lower than 850 square feet. And you'll notice that in the proposed, so that way it's in compliance with state law, we had to change that threshold to 850 square feet with an ADU, with one or less bedrooms. In the state law indicated that if you were to propose an 850 square feet, at least allow for one bedroom in that ADU. So again, you can see the change from 600, what we had in 2018, now increasing that to 850 square feet. And that also included, for those ADUs that were 1,000 within that lot size category, to also provide one bedroom or more for 1,000 square foot ADU minimum. So you can see the sliding scale. The largest ADU that can be proposed are the larger lots, which is 1,200 square feet. Any questions?
So just looking at your proposed ordinance here, so under the ADU, they won't have no more than one bedroom at all. Is that correct?
I'm sorry?
Under the ADU proposal ordinance or matrix that you have here, no ADU will have more than one bedroom.
So essentially, you can have more than one bedroom. So what this is essentially saying is that if you're going to propose an 850 square foot ADU, you have to provide at least one bedroom.
So can I ask and sorry for this silly question perhaps, but what's the difference between, say, an ADU and someone else who just wants to place 1,000 or 1,200 square foot home onto their property?
Good question. So single-family residential zoning essentially is it's one house per lot. You can't come in and do two houses on one single-family residential lot. So this accessory dwelling unit This ADU law passed by the state essentially allowed to add an additional unit on the single-family residential property, and they term that as accessory dwelling unit.
So someone can have a 1,200 square foot home or ADU with 2 or 3 units on there.
Correct.
So that's essentially adding another single family home on there.
Right. But according to state law, they're viewing that as you have a primary home, an accessory dwelling unit, and I'll get into the junior accessory dwelling unit. But at the end, just for context, on one single family residential lot per state law, we have to allow one, the primary home, and then you can convert part of the primary home, no more than 500 square feet, classify that as a junior accessory dwelling unit, and then have a detached accessory dwelling unit. So at the end of the day, on a single family residential property, you can have 3 units maximum.
Just a note in that case, so that none of the units would be subdivided, that would be. So a 2-on-1 would be a subdivided unit, but in the case the ADU is not subdivided.
Right. Next slide. So another thing that the law does is it clarifies that when ADUs are created through the conversion of a garage, a carport, or covered parking structure, also replacement of off-street parking space. At the end of the day, with those conversions, the garage, the carport, and the covered parking structure, replacement of off-street parking cannot be required by the local agency. Conversion of an existing accessory structure or portion of the existing primary residence to an ADU is not subject to the size requirements. So I'm going to go through a series of examples on this one. So when I mentioned the junior accessory dwelling units, conversion within the way that it's viewed under state law, if you were to convert an existing single-family home no more than 500 square feet, and it indicates it has to be within the envelope of the single-family home. So let's say you have a 2-story single-family home and you want to convert the garage. The homeowner has the option of converting it as a accessory dwelling unit or a JADU. Now, if the homeowner were to propose converting to an ADU, they do not have to comply with replacement parking. If they propose a JADU, a junior accessory dwelling unit, state law allows the city to require replacement parking if they were to classify it as a junior accessory dwelling unit. So you can see already in that case, what they're going to do is they're going to convert within the existing living area. One unique thing about Baldwin Park is if you look at a map, a transit map of the city, almost every property in the city is within a half mile of a transit stop, and because of that, cannot require replacement parking. So that's one key thing about Baldwin Park. Another is in state law, it reduces a maximum ADU and junior accessory dwelling unit application review from 120 days to 60 days. So definitely you can see that our planning division is hard at work trying to process these things so that way they're in accordance with the time indicated in the law. Next slide. Again, as I mentioned, state law allows both an ADU and a JADU on a residential lot. The previous law only allowed one or the other. So you couldn't have a JADU, your primary home, and then an ADU. Here, it essentially opened up the opportunity to have all 3 on the property. It also allows a permitted junior accessory dwelling unit, again, to be constructed, again, not to exceed the 500 square feet. And again, as I mentioned, the JADU created in the attached garage isn't subject to the same parking protections as the accessory dwelling unit. The other change in state law is that the city cannot charge development impact fees for any ADU that is 750 square feet or less. So between 750 and the maximum allowed of 1,200, it's about 450. that the city can charge for development impact fees. That has to be proportional to the square footage of the primary dwelling unit. Again, as I mentioned, junior accessory dwelling units are limited to one per residential lot with a single-family residence. And junior accessory dwelling units are not allowed in accessory structures. Next. So this is where I was getting back. So this slide here is going to sum up what's allowed in multifamily residential zones. So we have to at least allow one ADU to be created within the non-livable space of a multifamily dwelling unit structure. And that includes, and it's not limited to, storage rooms, boiler rooms, passageways, attics, basements, and or garages. And so this is the next one is we also, or up to 25% of the existing multifamily dwelling units within a structure may also allow not more than 2 ADUs on the lot detached from the multifamily dwelling unit structure. And new detached units are subject to height limits of 16 feet, so single story, and also shall not be required to have the side and rear yard setbacks of more than 4 feet. So in this example, you have 200 apartment units. 25% is the limit that you can convert non-livable areas, again, storage rooms, boiler rooms, passageways, attics, basements, or garages. That hasn't taken place in Baldwin Park yet, but I have talked to my fellow planners in other cities where they have large multi-family complexes where they've been approached by the ownership to want to convert some of those carports and garages. And again, that is, you have to allow it. There isn't anything the city can do about that. Next. One key thing here that's different from what was in the previous ADU law is that it eliminates all owner occupancy requirements by local agencies for ADUs approved between January 1st, 2020 and also January 1st, 2025. One key thing about this is that they didn't include junior accessory dwelling units. So we are processing deed restrictions for JADUs to comply with the homeowner, the owner occupancy requirement. But we can't do that for the ADUs. Again, that sunsets in 2025. But we have to make sure that we honor that between that time period. The other key thing in the law is that HOAs cannot reasonably prohibit ADUs or junior accessory dwelling units. So CCNRs that either effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the construction or use of ADU or a JADU on a single family lot, those CCNRs are null and void. So for planned communities that have restricted those, they're null and void, and they can come in and propose a JADU or an ADU by converting the garage or existing livable space. One thing I wanted to add, and I forgot to mention in the earlier slide, the other example is, let's say you had a 2,000 square foot, 2-story home. The state law does not have a maximum of how much you can convert an ADU within a single family home. So for example, if you wanted to convert the second floor to an ADU, there are no maximum thresholds. And again, you could see the larger the house, the bigger the ADU that you can convert. So I wanted to just make that note because I forgot to cover that. So it's important change in the law. And lastly, as you've been hearing, as I mentioned before in our housing element discussions, is that the ADUs and the JADUs can count towards meeting those RENA requirements. I will say that the numbers that have been provided during the housing element workshops, those numbers are updated and have been, and the ADUs and the JADUs have been included in those numbers as far as where we're at today in meeting RENA in our current cycle and then looking out to our next housing cycle. Next slide. So just based on council questions from previous discussions, I wanted to include some data on fees in construction. We do provide this information. We do get a lot of questions from the public regarding how much does it cost to convert a garage or build an ADU? What are the permit fees? I just wanted to give you some context here as far as what those costs mean, and we share that. Again, they're approximations, and this is based on examples, real examples of processing ADUs and JDUs. So, for example, for a garage conversion, just depending on depending on the type of materials that are used, because some can get very fancy and some are very simple. They range between $25,000 and $50,000 just for a garage conversion, and then permit fees, city permit fees, are about a little over $4,000. Then for new construction, it ranges between $177,000 to $220,000, and that's based approximately on like $200 a square foot. And then city permit fees range in the amount of a little over $11,000. And again, we provide this information to the public because the building division has done an excellent job in providing that information to the public. So that way they're educated on what the costs are associated with wanting to do an ADU or a JADU. Next slide. So far, I just want to give you some data here. From 2019 to 2021, staff has processed 123 ADUs. And those 123 ADUs consist of new construction, detached, attached. I just got some recent data from the building department. I really appreciate that they did this on short notice. With an additional 47 have been processed between that time period for garage conversions. You can add those two. 47 garage conversions within that time period and 123 ADUs processed by city development staff. Next slide. So code enforcement cases, between that time period, we've had a total of 117 cases cited for illegal garage conversions. And of those 117 cases, there are currently 25 cases still ongoing. I just wanted to give you some context on code enforcement violations for garage conversions. The hope there, yesterday when when we're looking at this, is one interesting thing to note is of those cases that were closed, how many of those that I indicated that staff processed for garage conversions or ADUs, which one of those, how many did either just convert the structure back to its original use, or they went ahead and they took advantage of the state ADU law. Next. So prefab and manufactured homes. Under the state ADU law, yes. An ADU is essentially under the definition of the Health and Safety Code. An ADU is any residential dwelling unit with independent facilities and permanent provisions for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation. So prefab homes, manufactured homes can be proposed as an ADU. Next slide. So the Measure H homeless implementation activities. And I apologize, that is the wrong date. It should have read September 1st. So the next study session with the council, as you know, with Measure H, has funded not only the inclusionary housing ordinance study that is going to be presented before the council to consider what appropriate affordability percentages for market rate housing within the city. They also conducted a study on incentivizing ADU production affordably to help address the housing crisis. And those that are going to be presented are, for example, financial subsidies, permit streamlining, project assistance, amnesty for unpermitted units, targeting low to moderate income homeowners, and also low income renters, households experiencing or at risk of homelessness, or in general, universally targeting toward a general increase in the housing supply. And again, this is a quote out of the state HCD guidebook, is that, again, the impetus for the ADU law is to improve its effectiveness at creating more housing units and to further reduce barriers, better streamline approval process, expand capacity to accommodate the development of ADUs and junior accessory dwelling units. That sums up staff's presentation. Again, the proposed ordinance for the ADU is going to be coming before the Planning Commission and the City Council in the coming month for your adoption. I wanted to have this study session to be able to answer any questions because it is very, it can be confusing. It can cause a headache. But I wanted to share these changes with you ahead of time as you will be getting that ordinance before you for approval. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Mayor?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Ron, for that presentation. A lot of information, but thank you for everything. I do have a few questions. As a city, have we considered the impact it may have on parking violations? For example, on sweeper days when nobody should be on the street and now we have more ADUs on one street per se. What are we going to do about those type of situations? Because obviously there won't be parking. As it is now, I know on sweeper days, people park on their yard or blocking driveways, which I've requested not to cite because there's no other parking. As a city, have we thought about what kind of impact that will do and what we are going to do about that? So that's one question. And then my second question, out of the ADUs that you found were illegal, I know you said they were cited. Now, were they cited for a dollar amount, or were they given a warning and time to bring that ADU up to code? How was that process done?
Good question. So to answer your first question on parking and street parking, as you know, with this presentation, it's going to impact parking, as you mentioned. We haven't looked at that. That's something, again, that's why I wanted to bring this forward to you guys to think about those things in the future. Again, as I noted early on with our discussions with HCD, their response also was, the state is promoting for people to use public transportation. So they really didn't hear us loud and clear on permit parking. I'm sure they're hearing that from every city across California, the impacts it'll have, especially for those cities like Baldwin Park that are within a half mile of a transit stop that we can't require replacement parking. But no, we haven't as part of this, but good. It's a good idea for us to look at.
Yes, we need to consider that to make sure we have a plan because they won't have a place to park.
And then to answer your second question, I just pulled the raw data, just numbers. Didn't dive deep on how those ADUs were closed out or mitigated, but that's something I can look into.
If you can do that, because I know, I'm sure there's a lot of ADUs out there that were done illegally for whatever the reason. I don't know how my colleagues feel. I would like to give these people the opportunity to either bring it back to the way it was or give them the time to fix the ADU to where it's supposed to be to meet the codes and give them a certain amount of time before they actually get a citation. Because, the reason a lot of people do that is because they need extra money, or maybe because a family member has nowhere else to live and now they brought a family member to their home and they converted an ADU. So if you can look into that, please. And then also on the permits for the ADUs, are they as costly or are they the same price as if you're building a new home on a lot? Same price. And will that be the same for the prefabricated homes, the permits for that? How would that work since they're already prefabricated?
I don't have that raw data as far as what the key differences are between the prefab. I will say that I'm sure there is some advantage because it's prefab. You're not starting from the ground up. There is some advantage there, but I can bring that back as far as what that difference is.
Okay, thank you, Ron. That's all my questions for now. I'm sure I'll come up with more later. Thank you.
Perfect. I did want to emphasize to the council and to the public in general is I want to assure you as staff, the development team, we never treat anybody as code violators, especially with garage conversions. Our goal is to make sure that we provide options to those people that have been cited for whatever reason to achieve their goals and provide them those options so that way they can mitigate that issue. But we work with them throughout the process so that way it's take away as much stress as possible to try to assist them, because we also review it, also kind of looking at it as if it were a brand new submittal. But I can reassure you that development staff never look at it as a code, looking at them as a code violator, but getting them to a point where they can achieve their goal.
Thank you, Ron, for that. I actually was looking for that type of answer because I know that's exactly what you do. Because we've had this conversation before, and I know I have actually referred people to you when they've had to fix something or what have you when it comes to a code violation. And I wanted the public to hear that you do work with them from the
Absolutely.
beginning and you try to figure out best solution for our community members. So thank you for clarifying that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great. So if no other council members have any questions regarding this
Mayor?
presentation, yes, Councilmember Hernandez.
Thank you. Just for our clarification, what's the assessment as it relates to, say, the garages and these ADUs on properties? We know that?
Assessment.
Assessment and their tax property?
Yeah, so tax property, good question. So it does get assessed in that the tax assessor will look at the livable area. So that's what so if you're increasing, for example, if you're doing a detached ADU, the tax assessor, the property will get reevaluated. And also, for example, if you have an existing single family home and and it's 1,500 square feet and the garage is attached, if they convert that garage, that becomes now assessed. So our building department manages that. When they get processed, they send that over to the LA County Tax Assessor's Office for their action.
Got it. And so there's no necessarily benefit to them, at least on the tax wise, or some sort of assistance for them on that side. It's just they'll get reassessed. So if somebody's owned a home for 20, 15 plus years, this is something that they should be expecting a new tax bill, essentially.
Right. And along with school fees. So school fees also, because it's another unit, rentable unit, those fees also come into play.
Got it. Thank you.
Mayor, if I may?
Yes, Councilmember Damian.
Yes, Councilmember Hernandez brought up a very great point. Ron, when some of our residents go into the planning department to apply for these ADUs or are currently working on these, is this mentioned to them? Because I know some of them are under the impression, especially like Councilmember Hernandez said, if someone's owned the property for 15 to 20 years, their property tax bill annually is very low compared to what new homeowners would be paying for now. So do you guys actually, give them that information, let them know that the new property value will be reassessed and their property taxes would increase?
The answer is yes. Not everybody does ask the question, but we do. When the opportunity arises, we do provide that information to them. Most of the times, again, as you saw the slide on the cost of building an ADU, constructing an ADU, it's very expensive. And our experience has been when we deal with the architects that are assisting the homeowners with designing and preparing plans for the ADUs, they already come in with that assumption, knowing that the property is going to be reassessed because it is an additional unit. But yes, we are transparent in that. We do provide that information when they do ask, and we do commend them when they do ask those questions, because it's really unfortunate for those very, very few cases where they've been caught off guard that they didn't know that it was going to be reassessed. But the majority already understand that that's going to be part of the process. We've experienced too lately, especially with the increase in cost of land and increase in property values. A lot of homeowners in Baldwin Park that have owned a home, they've seen their property values, triple. They say, hey, I've been able to acquire so much equity in my home. makes it feasible for me to do an ADU to offset, future plans for maybe renting the primary home and then living in the ADU, or just using it as a rental property.
And then my last request, Ron, would you be able to send us a copy of this presentation?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can email it to all the council members. Again, I'm going to be reiterating this information and presentation to the Planning Commission and again at the City Council.
Great. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor,
Councilmember Garcia.
thank you. So, Ron, thank you for this presentation and thank you for being so generous with your time yesterday when we met to review this information, and you allowed me the opportunity to ask a lot of questions. And I did appreciate all the work that you're putting into this. This is basically a state mandate. And while I support, the opportunity to create more housing, I also wish that the city had more control over the regulation, going back to some of the comments made by Mayor Pro Tem Avila about parking and things like that. This way we could develop our city in the way that makes sense for us. But since this is a state mandate and these new rules apply, I definitely want to say thank you for all the work that you've put into leading this effort. And I did want to follow up on the question about, I think we all have questions about how the properties will be assessed with these improvements. I want to understand that a little bit more, because I am thinking about the existing, let's say, garage conversions, and they're under our radar right now. And there's really, unless there's a report or a complaint to the code enforcement, we're really not going to know that there's an illegal conversion, or what we would consider an illegal conversion at this point. And so I would imagine that there are a number of these additional housing units that are being underreported. So my question is, how can we incentivize property owners to get these illegal, quote unquote, conversions to become legal, and so that we can account for them in our RENA numbers, and just in our planning and development overall? So if I understood the mechanism for tax assessment and what that looks like exactly, then maybe what we could do here is we could figure out a way to create a program that incentivizes, property owners who have already converted their garages to then go through a more formal process of getting them permitted and then accounted for. So I'd like to understand how we can do that more, because otherwise, we're doing ourselves a disservice, and we don't want to do that. So if you can help us, maybe in the future at a future council meeting, like walk us through an example of a home, an example, single family, 1,000 square feet, and it's valued at 500,000. And if they added an ADU, what that would trigger. If they added a JADU, what that would trigger. If you could help us walk through that scenario in the future, I would really appreciate it. Because again, I'm looking for ways to incentivize these property owners. And right now, it just seems like they're not incentivized, right? If there are current garages that have been converted, they're flying under the radar. The property owners are collecting the rental income. We're not accounting any of that for RENA or any other obligation that we have when it comes to housing. And so really there's no incentive. You see what I mean? As it exists right now, unless somebody reports them as an illegal conversion. and then brings it to the city's attention. Do you know what I mean, Ron?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Part of that presentation on September 1st, some of the incentives that I went over in that slide is going to cover that in detail. Some just essentially a list of opportunities for the council to direct staff in the future when we get past these studies. The second phase is implementation. And I'm hearing that there are funds that are going to be available for the city to apply for to set the implementation. And again, that all goes together with trying to incentivize those people that have illegal garage conversions. And also in preparation for the council meeting, I could bring this back. We can engage the LA County Assessor's Office to understand their process and report that back to the council to provide that detailed process to assist the council in making those decisions and implementation.
Okay, thank you. I would certainly appreciate that. And then the other item that we discussed yesterday is having the ability to track these new units, and whether they're ADUs, JADUs, and being able to geocode them if possible. And so this is a new kind of development in our city that's going to have a significant impact to the look and feel of our neighborhoods. And I'd like to be able to track that development as we move forward for the purposes that you mentioned in reporting to the state and making sure that we're meeting our obligations, but also just to know, what neighborhoods are being more impacted, how we can address them through infrastructure improvements and things like that too. So just moving forward over the next, I envision like 5 to 10 years. So I would ask that you bring forward, if we don't already have the capability, bring forward a request to the council so that we can have the technology to track this kind of development, whether that's like through an ESRI or whatever system you think makes sense, what other cities are doing. This way, again, it doesn't get away from us, it doesn't become so cumbersome, and we're able to track this kind of development just like we would a multifamily development project. We want to be able to gauge the impacts and how many multifamily development projects are coming into the city. Similar thinking, similar approach, but obviously it's a whole different policy now fueling this kind of development. So I would ask you to think about what that looks like, and bring that to the city council at a later time too, so that we can we can initiate that early on in this policy. We don't get too far into this policy without having that data to track.
Yes, absolutely. We've engaged Good News. I've engaged Public Works Director Sam Gutierrez, and confirmed that our existing new Tyler permitting system allows for geocoding to do that. So we're going to work hand in hand with Public Works to provide them that information and geocode that and put that up as a GIS map. So we don't have to go out for services on that one. So I was happy about that. So definitely we'll come back to the council and be able to track that data.
Oh, good. Okay. So then along those lines, if we could make sure that like the JADUs are different, we can identify them differently than an ADU on a
Yes.
map and things like that. Okay, great. Thanks so much, Ron. I really appreciate all the work. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Great. So at this moment, we do need to start moving into closed session. So Ron, I want to thank you for being here with us today and giving us that detailed presentation. Sounds confusing, so I'm sure the council and myself are glad that you figured it out so that we can, get the explanations from you. So thank you.
Thank you,
Ron.
council. And I just want to mention I couldn't do without our planning staff. Without them, I would not be able to. They're my left hand, right hand. But I definitely I owe planning staff, public works, the building department, because without them, this wouldn't be possible.
Yes, of course.
Of course.
Thank you to all the staff. I know you guys are all working hard all the time. So
Great team. Thank you.
great. So at this moment, we will move to recess into closed session.